Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. For those people who don't know me yet, my name is Maksym Skrypchenko. I'm the president of the Transatlantic Dialogue Center. I'll be a moderator today. Today we are having a great discussion with our friends from Washington, D.C., from Razom for Ukraine. It is an NGO which is based in the United States, in Ukraine, but today we are talking to their advocacy team that is doing a lot of advocacy pro-Ukraine, I would say. Advocacy efforts in the US, working on the Capitol Hill, talking to members of Congress, their officers, advisors, the Trump administration, and working in different districts across the United States. And I hope this discussion will be interesting for you. So today we are welcoming here Daniel Balson, who is the Director of Public Engagement, Daniel Vaynshteyn, who is the Advocacy Associate, and Anastasiia Sliusarenko, who is the Community Engagement Coordinator and the original Ukrainian in the team. So last year, we had a similar event here, and at that time the focus was on identifying effective advocacy methods to be implemented by Ukrainian voices in Washington during the election period. And we were talking a lot at that time about how important bipartisan support is, and how the American perspective on Ukraine shouldn't be about taking any sides. And it was about finding practical ways to support Ukraine in changing the narrative from that's happening here to that's what Russia is doing to us. And we were also saying that the longer the war is on, the shorter the attention span of many US congressional members is. And now we are in completely different reality with a different administration, with different Congress. Everything is actually different, and we are not longer talking about any more supplementals, aid packages coming to Ukraine from the United States. It's a completely different discussion. Now we are talking about how to save that level of support that we have now. We are now talking not about free Patriot systems and missiles from the US. We are talking about how can we make sure that the Trump administration can sell the systems and missiles further. So it's a whole different complex of issues that we are discussing. And of course, it all leads to the inevitable evolution of the advocacy methods. So today we're going to speak about this. I will be asking several questions from our speakers today, and then we will switch to our audience. And of course, we have some already prepared questions from the audience, so I'll also highlight them. So the first question would be to Daniel Balson about the Razom for Ukraine priorities in advocacy now. So how have they been changing since Donald Trump was elected? How did Razom change its approaches when communicating to the public and to the media in the United States? It is very broad, but it gives you a lot of space for your...
Yeah, thank you so much. First of all, let me start with the obvious, that it's such a pleasure to be here. I'm very grateful for the opportunity. I don't want to be in Ukraine and not accused of never saying thank you. So I want to thank the Ukraine Crisis Media Center, the Transatlantic Dialogue Center for putting this on. This is really a wonderful event. Let me just start with sort of laying out a few things about what has changed. We have a new president in Washington. And, you know, I think everybody is struggling right now with this question of how to operate. I remember having a good conversation with a very close friend of mine who's a diplomat for a major Western country that is not the United States, but that I won't name. And I sort of asked him, I said, you know, if you were an American diplomat, how do you operate in a moment where the leadership is so mercurial, subject to so much change? What do you do? And he basically said, listen, I would walk into the foreign ministry and I would say, hi, I'm the ambassador, and I cannot change anything that Trump decides. What Trump decides, he will decide. But I promise to faithfully relay your views to Capitol. But that's really as kind of best as you can do. Let me lay out kind of 5 things that I think have changed since the previous administration, beyond the fact that Trump is president. And the policy is different. But first, there is no more policy-making process. I think that's important for people to understand. Typically, when there's an administration, there's a process in place by which an idea goes and is debated and considered and resources are allocated, and then eventually it becomes policy. That has largely been dismantled by the administration, and decisions are made by several people. There is a new cadre of individuals who are in power, who kind of staff the government. They're selected primarily on the basis of loyalty to the president and his priorities. They are young, by and large. They have very limited experience with Washington, D.C., and a kind of intuitive hostility, skepticism of the bureaucracy in which they serve and which they oversee. The decision-making process is very non-transparent. So everybody from, I don't know, the embassy of Kenya to Razom for Ukraine to God knows who else is scrambling to figure out how the administration makes decisions, who Trump is hearing from, and it ranges from formally nominated and official people to, maybe a friend or someone that one of his family members hangs out with. There is, number 4, increased opposition to Ukraine. This doesn't surprise, I think, anybody in this room amongst conservative circles. That opposition is typically reflected in 2 registers, I would say. There's a low register, which you hear often on some cable news channels. It's essentially very conspiratorial, uninformed. And then there'll be a higher register, which is articulated by some of the senior strategists within this administration. It will talk about how there's an age of limited resources, the U.S. needs to focus on China and Taiwan, but there are a lot of overlaps. And then finally, I would say an important difference is the centralization of the Republican Party apparatus under the power of one man. During the first Trump administration presidency, the president, had quite a bit of pushback within his own political party. That has now changed, and the Republican Party has been remolded in the shape of the president. So I would say from Razom's standpoint, to kind of put a fine point on this question, we've been preparing for this for several years, I would say. We have been operating under the assumption that this election would be won by the Republican Party and President Trump. That means first of all, one of the ways that we've been preparing and engaging is spending a lot of time in Republican spaces and spaces where Republicans are. Most of those spaces are not in Washington, but around the country. That means thinking critically about how to engage with the coalition and identifying people who have Trump's ear, who may be sympathetic to Ukraine. I like to say that there's no such thing as a typical Trump voter. The people who brought the president into power all have one thing in common. It's that they could not accept 4 years of a Kamala Harris. That's it. But people went to the poll and cast their ballot for President Trump for different reasons. So thinking through what are some of the demographics that we can speak to and have a constructive conversation about Ukraine. Veterans are one. Religious people and faith-based leaders. So whether it's evangelical ministers, the Jewish community is another. Business leaders and donors and people who have been very successful in kind of very mainstream pursuits, I would say, is yet another. And then finally, I've been going on for long, but I brought along an example. I wanted to show you it's engaging with the media in a constructive and interesting way. We know what the president reads. We know what people who are close to him read. This is, you might have seen this. This is the cover of the New York Post from a little while back. We made the mistake of leaving a photo of Putin around a group of Ukrainians, and so it did not go unvandalized, understandably, for more than 30 seconds. But immediately after the fiasco in the White House during the Trump-Zelensky confrontation, we took out a advertisement. We took out an advertisement in the New York Post. This is a newspaper that's placed on his desk every morning, specifically spotlighting an issue that is deeply important and resonant to many conservatives, and of course, people who care about Ukraine, which is the fact that thousands, 19,546 or whatever number you choose, Ukrainian children have been kidnapped by the Russian Federation. So thinking through new ways to talk to the president and to MAGA world.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. Now we switch to another Daniel, who is sitting right next to me. So you've been working in one of the congressional offices before joining Razom for Ukraine, and you have a lot of insights about how the House of Representatives has been looking at Ukraine since the start of the full-scale invasion. So very interested about your perspective as for the Congress. Where do you think Ukraine stands now in terms of bipartisan support in both chambers? And we remember from the previous voting that there are votes for Ukraine, there are votes against Russia for new sanctions. At the same time, we've heard from some congressional offices that they would be happy to move quickly on imposing new sanctions on Russia. But there is a big but. It's the White House, and they depend on its decisions heavily. So it would be very interesting to hear from you some sort of short briefing, probably, on this. And it would be very interesting to hear about the methods Razom is using in Congress to achieve its goals. We've just heard about some creative methods about working with the media. How about the Congress? Because it's probably one of the most complicated and most bureaucratic parts.
Sure. Well, thank you for the question, Maksym, and thank you, everyone, so much for being here. So my title is an advocacy associate, but what that means in essence is that I am a registered lobbyist, and along with our government affairs team, we go around to different congressional offices and different political institutions within Washington and make the policy case for U.S. support for Ukraine and a strong U.S.-Ukrainian bilateral relationship. I would say from my experience talking to both Republicans and Democratic offices in Congress specifically, there still is a large amount of bipartisan support for Ukraine that exists within the establishment of both parties within the House of Representatives and within the Senate. So that begs the next question, which is why has there been very little action actually taken by Congress to support Ukraine? And I would say that this is a part of a broader political trend within the United States in which political power is being more and more centralized within the executive branch as opposed to the legislative branch. While this administration and President Trump has certainly accelerated that process of the centralization of power, this has been an ongoing trend within American politics for the last few decades. And particularly Congress has ceded a lot of its authority even before Trump to allow the executive branch to make decisions unilaterally on a number of issues, including foreign policy. So what are the strategies we use in Congress, and I guess particularly in this context and in this time, what are the strategies we use for congressional Republicans? I would say, first and foremost, it is understanding and meeting these congressional Republicans where they are. And what I mean by that is before we go into any meeting with a congressional office, it is important for us to not only understand what committees of jurisdiction do they sit on, so what issues do they focus on and they care about, and that's not always, let's say, the Foreign Affairs Committee or the Armed Services Committee, which would deal directly most with the issue of Ukraine, but also trying to understand their district as well, right? What are the chief economic drivers of their district? What is the level of poverty or wealth that exists among their constituencies? Because oftentimes members of Congress are a reflection of the communities that they come from. So we try to look at issues that they care about, issues that matter to the constituency at large, and bring Ukraine to the table. So for example, one easy one is that even though you have a lot of Republicans who might share skepticism towards supporting additional supplemental aid packages to Ukraine, there is a number of Republicans who are very hawkish and skeptical of either China or Iran. So one of the strategies that we've implemented is bringing the case to them about why this axis of aggressors or new axis of evil, as they call it, is working together and how Russia is at the center of it. The other question I get a lot, specifically from Republican offices, is what is the ROI, or what is the return on investment that support for Ukraine has for my average voter, for my average constituent? And in this case, we have started to shift our rhetoric, as opposed to previously where we talked about shared values, to talk about what is the direct benefit and what can America and Americans gain from this relationship in Ukraine, whether it's in terms of the great technology and insights we can get from Ukraine's war against Russia and the lessons learned, to everything from the economic investments that are being made in the United States as a result of this relationship. Recently, back in December, I think some meetings that we had with the Louisiana delegation, which is particularly powerful in the House of Representatives because both the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader from Louisiana is discussing the fact that Ukraine has started to purchase liquid natural gas from Louisiana, which is a huge industry from the state and drives a lot of job creation in the state as well. So that's the two-pronged approach that we take. But I will say the good news is that not only are congressional Republicans in line, broadly speaking, with Ukraine's cause, despite the fact that there is a very loud and very vocal minority against it, but our Democratic friends and our Democratic colleagues also understand the importance of keeping this issue bipartisan. And the last point that I'll make before handing back the mic to Maksym, is that one of the things that we try to do, especially when we talk to the pro-Ukrainian Republicans, is try our best to promote pro-Ukrainian Republican voices in Republican spaces and allow them to feel comfortable and feel that it is in their political interest, not just in their policy interest, to continue making the case to their colleagues and their constituency about why they personally agree with Razom on our view that Ukraine should be supported.
Thank you. Just a quick question to follow up, probably. Based on the figures that you have in mind, do we still have the majority in both chambers happy to jump in on pro-Ukraine bills, anti-Russia bills, meaning sanction bills, or providing Ukraine with more weapons? So how do you look at that?
So one great way to look at this is by looking at who are the co-sponsors of pro-Ukrainian pieces of legislation. What a co-sponsorship is, for those who might not be familiar, is that when a senator introduces a piece of legislation, other senators can sign on as co-sponsors, which essentially means that they endorse the bill. So for the sanctions bill that we're talking about, Lindsey Graham's sanctions bill, we have over 80 members of the Senate out of 100 that have co-sponsored the Senate bill, right? And a lot of those, of course, are Republicans because Republicans have the majority. So that's one good way of being able to track levels of support for Ukraine. The other way we look at it is looking at statements that people have made related to the conflict, whether it's related to Trump's actions and related to the rhetoric around these peace negotiations. Specifically, if they understand the basic fact that Vladimir Putin is not negotiating in good faith and is a bad actor within these negotiations, which we have seen a lot of senators, even those who might have been who are skeptical of Ukraine and might have voted against previous supplementals, share concerns in this fact that Putin is not serious about negotiating. Broadly speaking, I would say that even though a lot of Republican voters might have skepticism towards Ukraine, Republicans by and large detest Vladimir Putin. I would say Vladimir Putin is as unpopular in the Republican Party as Trump is popular. Republicans understand, by and large, that not only is Vladimir Putin a threat to America's national interests, but also very little of Republican elected officials and Republican voters buy into some of the narratives that we've seen, let's say, from Tucker Carlson, that, let's say, this war was started due to NATO enlargement or due to Western imperialism. Through anecdotal conversations and through polling that we've done in Republican voters, we have seen that this is just not the case with where Republican voters are. So those are two ways to sort of track where elected Republican officials are on this issue. But I will also say from conversations that we've had from Republicans who will say to us, listen, we are nervous about going on the record and going against Trump's proposal for peace because we believe that it could potentially cost us electorally. Because Republican elections, inter-party elections, are solely decided on who Trump endorses. But they have indicated to us that they are having a lot of conversations with the administration and back-channeling with them, pushing for Ukraine's cause as well.
Thank you. Anastasiia, you know, every time we were meeting in DC, I saw you trying to convince some people that they should support Ukraine. So you are, from all the people I know, you are very, you're a fan of your work and of your job. So kind of curious about the messaging, your messaging, how it has been evolving since the start of the invasion, because you are talking to the people on the ground, and you are always trying to find something that can find their heart, find something that you could use later to convert it into more support for Ukraine. So interested in A, how much of your messaging has changed, B, how much of what you hear from those people has changed since 2022, because it's been a lot. It's been you know, Russians were close to Kyiv, then it was the counteroffensive operations, then it was several successful military operations, including the latest one. How does it reflect on, you know, your communication with the, I would say, constituencies?
Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be here in the heart of Ukraine. I absolutely love that our team is doing our work here on my territory now, because usually I'm on their territory, and it's, you know, I have to play by their rules. So welcome to my world now. And thank you, Maksym, for hosting us. For the first time we met with Max, it was RNC, Republican National Convention. It was a very challenging time for me, my colleagues, because we felt like we're going to be there in minority, and it was a very aggressive fight between Democratic leader and Republican Party leader. I think we all seen it even from here, from Ukraine. So from their arguments, we felt like we are completely going to be in minority, maybe pushed over to the side. And that was one of those first times when I started learning their psychology and their way of thinking better, deeper, and that's very important for us as Ukrainians to understand the way our allies, one of the main allies, the strongest allies, are thinking and working. And of course, our strategy, I work on public engagement team, and our whole team as advocacy team, our strategy has been changing a lot, and that's what's making us professionals, because the strategy of the White House has been changing as well. The strategy of America has been changing, so we had to adjust to it as well. So I would just say a couple things that for us as a public engagement team, we do have 5 districts, 5 states, I apologize, 5 states that we focus on. Do you mind if I name it? This is my boss. Yes. So we have, of course, would you guess the first one? Who would guess the first one? I think you can. Florida. Exactly. Thank you. All right. So Florida is first state. Then we have Louisiana. We have Georgia, North Carolina, and you forgot? Texas. All right. So those are the 5 states that we are focusing on as much as possible, but even our main focus is to work in districts. And last month, I would say, we all focused on Washington, D.C. directly. Because, for example, we had a very big chance that, and very strong messaging from President Trump that he is going to just walk away from Ukraine, from negotiations. So we had to be all there and combine all our strengths, connections, knowledge in Washington, D.C. We published a lot of articles. We were on the news. If not us, then our partners were on the news. So we constantly adjusting our strategy to make sure that we are being heard, not only in Congress, not only in Senate, but in the White House, because that's the modern climate, political climate in Washington, D.C. We need to make sure that White House hears us, pro-Ukrainian voices. Our messaging had to change, and not even the main idea. Main idea had to stay very strong. I love Ukraine. My father's on the front line. I have very strong motivation to win this war as soon as possible. But we had to adjust our emotional coloring of our messaging. So during the presidency of President Biden, of course, we were able to work with Congress, Senate, and the White House based on our deep emotions. For example, this is so awful. Did you see those tortured soldiers on the front line or tortured civilians by Russians? And this argument would work strongly. And that's the topic that touches all of us Ukrainians deeply. In today's climate, that's not the argument that is going to work. First reason is because this argument already been brought up so many times, and it's just getting old, and people heard it so many times, and the response is like, okay, yes, you Ukrainians, we all have to feel sorry for you, but it just doesn't work. Just move on with your message. Second, it's just not the heaviest and the strongest argument and value for current administration. So we had to test different arguments, and that's why Daniel showed you why we posted specifically that message about kidnapped Ukrainian kids. After our polling, we understood what message is working the most, and we're constantly focusing on kidnapped kids and religious freedom. So this is very important to push the same message over and over again, and not to take responses no from our opponents, from our allies, way too personal. That's been a very big mistake from some of Ukrainian delegations, and it's wonderful to see many Ukrainian flags and delegations on Capitol Hill, but we Ukrainians come to Washington, D.C., and very often whenever congressman is telling us no, we cannot vote for Ukraine today, we react, how dare you? How dare you telling no to us? We are literally being bombed. We are literally being killed. Our women are being raped. Our kids are being kidnapped. Our people are in chambers, in torture chambers in Russia. This is just not normal for any brain. This is all wrong, and we're all getting all emotional, and that's it. Then conversation is completely over, and we're going back to poor Ukrainians again begging us for something and making us feel bad about ourselves instead of wearing right suits, right? And instead of being thankful for what America already doing. So that's why we need to stay clear-minded, not to take their no answers as an offense. Actually, I take it as a challenge. I like that. And I believe that this war pretty much opened any door and erased this answer no for me. Of course, there are still representatives in the Congress that we're not going to even waste our time to work on them, because for many reasons, because Russian propaganda got really deep under their skin, and we're just going to let them be. They are a critical minority. We have more friends there than enemies, for sure. But there are many ways of working with those who are still saying no. We understand that majority of them are still waiting for a signal or a phone call, as we discussed earlier, from President Trump. But there are some very reasonable ways to get to them, for example, our ways to work with Speaker Mike Johnson in Louisiana. We had already many visits to his small town, Shreveport, Louisiana. It's a very small town. It's like Bilet Cerkva, maybe smaller than that, maybe like even Kotelva в Полтавской области. So it's a very small town. There's not much to see, but people are wonderful, like in our villages. So we Ukrainians understand this open hearts and hospitality. So we found out that father of Speaker Johnson used to be a firefighter. So the first idea, I think it was your idea, Daniel, genius idea, I give you credit for that, to get a helmet of a Ukrainian firefighter that was already broken, all dirty, from the field, and bring it as a present to Speaker Mike Johnson. So that was a very strong emotional attachment and a great strategy, and that was something that got to the heart and made it more real for Speaker Johnson. And I think we're going to talk more about different strategies as we go, but yes, messaging changed, strategies changed, and they're going to continue to change, but it's just up to us to stay consistent on our messagings, and put our emotions aside and keep our heads clear. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your personal story. So right now, instead of asking my own questions, we'll be doing something different. So we'll take some questions from the audience that were pre-submitted before. While it's happening, I encourage the audience to prepare your own questions, and then you'll be able to ask them. So the first question, and I think Daniel, you'll be the one to respond, but also if you have something to add, just feel free to jump in. So it's a question from Daria Oranska. Given the Trump strategy of transnationalism, unpredictability, and focus on strategic deals, not alliances, how does Razom for Ukraine plan to adjust its advocacy if Ukraine is no longer a priority for him? And is there any lesson we could take from his previous term? And probably the last part will be mostly interested. Thank you.
Yeah, is this on? Okay. Let me start with the last point first. Lessons from the first term. So these are very different terms. I think there was a feeling within the Trump administration and the senior leadership in the White House that during the first term, executives who were put into positions and to take certain actions were unfairly constrained by what is referred to in American context as the deep state, so the career civil service employees. So the primary focus of this administration has been, from day one, to seize control of the rungs of power of the decision-making apparatus. That has involved efforts that I'm sure have been covered amply in Ukrainian media, such as Elon Musk. That has involved mass termination of U.S. government employees. That has involved stringent loyalty tests for political appointees. But there's really, I think, in many ways, a lot of difference between the first Trump administration and the second Trump administration. Now, absolutely, deals and deal-making is how the president sees the world. I think that has shaped how we engage with senior officials. We have been trying to move the discussion from Ukraine as a charity case, as many American officials, I think unfairly, largely understand it to be, and shine the spotlight on the many things that Ukraine has to offer America. Obviously the mineral deal is kind of one way in which this has manifested itself, but I think it's just more than that. This is a country of incredible human capital. I don't need to remind anybody in this room about that. But I think it's sometimes missing in the imagination of American policymakers. The innovation cycle when it comes to electronic warfare, drones, combat, medical stabilization, you name it, so many things. Ukraine is, I think, leaps and bounds ahead of the United States and is more than willing to share and educate American counterparts. So there's really quite a lot that the U.S. can gain from the partnership, and our focus has been during this Trump administration to shine the light on what those things might be.
You want to jump in? Sure.
Maybe to quickly add to that point, but a lot of Republican voters and a lot of Republican politicians really want to see President Trump succeed and fundamentally believe that Trump is a good deal maker. And there's evidence for some of these deals in the first term, most notably the Abraham Accords, which was pretty significant. So a lot of people will look at that success from the first term, despite how these negotiations are going, and still truly believe that there will be a positive outcome. So one of the ways we phrase this on Capitol Hill, specifically when it comes to sanctions, is when we go to the Republican offices, we say, support sanctions against Russia. Give Donald Trump the tools he needs to negotiate the best deal possible and have a successful term. And that's one point that Daniel brought up was the minerals deal. We tried to frame this as a success for Trump's foreign policy, and specifically saying that within Trump's first 100 days, Ukraine helped deliver one of his biggest foreign policy wins. So again, Republican voters and Republican politicians really want to see this president succeed, really view themselves as a conduit to help this president succeed. And the more that we can message that support for Ukraine allows President Trump to do that, the more responsive and positive reactions we get from those constituencies.
Thank you. Okay, you agree. Okay, here's another question. I think this might be a very interesting one from Valeria Kirichok. How would the recent attack on Russian strategic aviation bases change the attitude towards Ukraine, both among the US administration and general American public? This is a complicated question, I know, but it's critical today after what we've read about Donald Trump's reaction towards it and how he mentioned it in a phone call with Putin. So who wants to be the first? Okay, Daniel. Which one? Yeah, we have two Daniels here, so it's kind of confusion.
Yeah, let me say two things. I think, first of all, policymakers in the U.S. were broadly shocked by the success, by the strategic planning, by the effectiveness of the attack. There were a lot of midnight meetings held in the Pentagon whereby I think senior American military officials were asking two questions, or three questions rather. First, how did the Ukrainians do this? Second of all, how do we replicate this if we need to? Third of all, how do we protect ourselves from our adversaries replicating this? I think it was a useful kind of visual demonstration of some of the things that I'm claiming here, that there are certain areas where Ukraine is, really like, to be generous, months, but really like years ahead of where U.S. planners are. I think, look, one thing that we know about President Trump is this is somebody who respects strength, or what he perceives to be strength. The Trump-Zelensky meeting that I've referenced many times, of course, one of the other famous lines that came out of that meeting is that Ukraine, Zelensky, you don't have any cards. You don't have any cards to play. It turns out that this country has some cards to play. So I think that has changed how Ukraine is understood and perceived among the U.S. population in ways that kind of align with the narrative that supporters of Ukraine want to tell about Ukraine and its war effort and its struggle.
Thank you. You want to jump in?
What I'll also add is that the American general public when it comes to support for any country during a conflict, is much more likely to support that country if they believe that that country is winning the war or having positive tactical successes on the battlefield. One of the narratives that we have to push back on a lot by Republican colleagues is this idea that we support Ukraine, we think that Russia's invasion is brutal and unjust, but we do not see a pathway or a possibility for a Ukrainian victory or even for Ukrainian tactical successes. And those recent events have kind of shattered that narrative a little bit and proved it wrong. And to the point that I mentioned earlier about what is the ROI for the average American constituent, importing some of these strategies and technology help us with our other presumed adversaries, helps us understand how we can strengthen our own national defense, which if you've seen Trump's recent comments about the Golden Dome or his wanting to build a Golden Dome is important for Republican voters. But also, I would say getting, like another thing that I mentioned earlier, is getting those pro-Republican voices to be able to feel confident to speak out for Ukraine in a positive way as well. So I think the developments have helped Ukraine's case within Washington, has shown, as Anastasiia was saying, that support for Ukraine is not a charity case. And the goal moving forward is to continue to highlight these advantages and to prove that not only is Ukrainian victory possible, but that ultimately a Ukrainian victory will have large and broad benefits for the American population.
Thank you. So probably a final question before we jump to our audience. So please feel, and I'll ask one of my colleagues to get a microphone if there is any spare microphones for the questions from the audience. So there is a question from Daniil Moskalenko. What are the main tools to convince the MAGA win that supporting Ukraine is necessary for global security and the security of the United States in particular? Obviously, this question is very closely connected to the questions asked before, but I would probably ask Anastasiia about the basic question: if we can actually convince that win, if we can, what should we do? This, a simple and a complicated question at the same time.
Absolutely. I believe that we will need to get some coffee and sit down for a few nights to discuss it and, unwrap this onion with many, many layers to understand the psychology of these people and why they're thinking the way they're thinking and why they're answering the way they're answering and why they're living the way they're living. So as soon as we understand what type of person it is, then it's much easier to approach them. The simple answer is yes. Yes, we can convince these people. One of my favorite ways to talk to them is to show them our similarities, show how many in common values we have as Ukrainians and MAGA Republicans, that we defend we respect life. We respect freedom. We absolutely respect the right to protect ourselves, right? Our enemy, terroristic neighbor came to our land and we took the guns. And you remember in the first month of the war, guns were just given to people to go and protect yourselves. Those are some few basic values of MAGA Republicans that they understand and they definitely can relate to. Whenever I tell them, if you have three sons or 3 daughters and the enemy or crazy neighbor came to you and took one of your daughters and doing awful things to your kid and just everybody else telling you, they're just one of your daughters. Just let her go. You still have 2 more. Would you say, okay? They're saying, oh, that's nonsense. Absolutely not. And I'm saying that's a similar thing that is happening in Ukraine. We would never say that it's okay. We would never let go of that. So we're just fighting for what is right. The other thing is religious freedom, that our cities in Ukraine are built around churches, and we respect that. And we have a lot of respect for religious freedom, and that's another thing that we already talked about, that MAGA Republicans respect. So the simple question, the simple answer is yes. We can convince them, and they respect strength the same way as President Trump. And right now, with this recent attack, we show that we are in strong position and that we are a very powerful player in this awful, unfair game.
Thank you. Anybody wants to jump in on that? No?
Maybe I'll add one more thing. And that is, I liked how the question was framed, the MAGA wing. And I think it's important to understand that that the MAGA coalition is beyond and broader than simply traditional conservatives, Ronald Reagan conservatives, and registered Republicans. If you actually look within the Trump administration, some of the biggest critics of Ukraine are former Democrats who came over to the other side to vote for President Trump. So Tulsi Gabbard, RFK, Elon Musk, even J.D. Vance used to be a huge critic of President Trump. So when we're talking about the MAGA wing and the MAGA coalition, it is important to understand who these new players are and who these new communities are that have allowed President Trump to win in 2024 with such a decisive mandate. And this could be everything from the Make America Healthy Again community, which is sort of RFK's wing of, skeptics of vaccines and public health, to perhaps one of the biggest industry donors in the past cycle, which were cryptocurrency companies. Cryptocurrency in general as an industry donated millions upon millions of dollars in the previous election cycle, and specifically very much backed President Trump. So it is important, I think, to understand that this MAGA coalition or the MAGA wing is broader than just traditional Republicans and conservatives. And what we are trying to work on and understand is who are these new communities within the MAGA movement who are not in the traditional conservative space, and how we can speak to them with a broader and appealing message. That's everything from understanding their point of view and their concerns to engaging on platforms like podcasts or alternative media where most of these people get their information from.
Thank you. Okay, so now we are, I think, ready to take some questions from the audience. Please briefly introduce yourself and then a question.
Thanks so much for being here. I'm Natalia. I'm the CEO for Teach for Ukraine and former Atlantic Council Deputy Director. So nice to see some familiar faces here. So I have kind of 3 questions, so pick your poison in a way. Some of them are easy, some of them are not so much. So one, speaking of the firefighter helmets, right, and all of the emotional sort of state that we want to create, we see that the visits to Ukraine are dwindling down quite a bit in comparison to how it was before, from visits from the US specifically. Do you still see that this is one of the tactics or strategies to try to convince those who are on the fence to come visit to Ukraine and engage locally with not only the government, but also people on the ground? Is that part of the agenda? Because we've seen how effective it has been, and the President Zelensky has been saying that over and over. So that's kind of question one. Another question, Daniel brought up something very significant and interesting. I understand completely how the strategy is focusing on the Republicans right now, super fair and absolutely needed. Do you still engage in any kind of strategies with the Democrats as well, knowing that the tendencies tend to change? And if we are not ahead of the wave, then we are losing our opportunity to engage with the Democrats that I'm personally sure will come after this administration, hopefully, fingers crossed. So that's a question 2. And a question 3 is territorial integrity. It's been brought up over and over again. If Ukraine is willing or not willing to kind of give up on certain stance. And I wonder what kind of attitudes and feelings you still see from the Republicans that you engage with. Do you use any particular tactics to convince them that territorial integrity is not something that Ukraine is willing to give up? And do they understand that this is a part of larger imperial appetites that Russia has? Because that's what I seen a misconception. That's why people don't get territorial integrity, because they don't get imperial appetite of the war. So very interested to hear your thoughts on those three, and you can pick one or none.
Yeah,
as well. Thanks.
Thank you. I think we may try to separate those questions for different people. The first question, perhaps on the business side, if Daniel or Anastasiia want to take it.
Thank you. Wonderful questions. Some of them are tricky, and we're trying not to bring them up very often. That's one of the strategies in the new approach, with the deeply understanding of the importance of those questions, absolutely. And again, with an emotional attachment of many of us on the team to Ukraine. Of course, wonderful, important, crucial questions, but we have to sometimes, not sometimes, all the time, prioritize those questions that still resonate with the current administration, that we minimize the risk of them giving up on Ukraine. But we're not the administration, so you can put us on the spot, I guess. The question about the helmet and the emotional attachment, we definitely did even more after that, because we understand that we need to finish the cycle. We need to, after the helmet, we brought cultural forces of Ukraine. You probably know the band who ended up playing with Sting, and they played at the fire station, and they cooked dinner for us. And then we brought a famous Ukrainian chef to Shreveport, and then we cooked for them. So we continue building these emotional bridges, and that's just one little example of what we're doing. We're doing it in many districts, and in every district it's a different strategy. So we're being as creative as possible. So we continue building that. Please remind me what else?
The question, the aspect was, are we focusing on bringing people here?
Yes. I'm sorry. I apologize. But this is very important. We ask and we invite people all the time. Please come to Ukraine, because we've seen it with the recent visit of Pastor Mark Burns, how much it helped to uncover those brutal moments of this war that weren't perhaps showed previously on some of TV channels or on some publications. So it's very important to bring as many people, and hopefully from the mega Republicans, to Ukraine, and so we don't have to explain the war in our words, and they can just see it simply, and we don't have to even say anything. Whenever you just cross the border to Ukraine, you cannot deny, you just feel it. You feel the tension in the air. You see the eyes of these people, if they're not, they can be just civilians. We see the depth of this fear and pain of these people. And we've just been today at the Maidan. It's impossible to hold tears back. So yes, we want to bring people back. It's challenging. It's challenging to convince them, and it even took a while for Senator Lindsey Graham, who's actually my senator in South Carolina, to come back, but he's still coming back. And those allies in Congress, they are helping to bring delegations. So I'm pretty sure that it's going to happen again. But yes, it's challenging, and it's crucially important to bring them here. So we invite them all the time.
I'll also briefly add to that during one of our last advocacy and research visits to the US as part of the TDC team, we met one of the congressional offices, and there was a staffer who said that my boss, meaning the member of Congress, was opposed to Ukraine aid until, and when he came back, he was like, oh, now I understand what's happening over there. So it works, yeah.
I'll just say a couple more words. So my congressman in South Carolina, Russell Fry, he knows me very well because I am very consistent with my message. He is a mega Republican, and he opposes helping Ukraine in my district where I live. So it's challenging. And he been to Ukraine. And even after coming back from Ukraine, his voting record still hasn't changed. So we have to continue working on this, and it's proving us again and again that they are waiting for the White House to give them stronger instructions of what to do. But still, it's important for them to come here and see it. Then it would be much easier for us to swing them in a very important time.
Daniel? You wanted to jump in? And
Yeah.
also, maybe you'll also, was it your point about bipartisanship?
I can talk about Democrats, yeah. Super quickly on that, I think, I want to touch on the first point very quickly. I think one of the challenges about bringing people here, of course, is that you can't scale that in a meaningful way. You can't bring every Republican voter to Ukraine. One of the ways you address that impediment, however, is to try and bring a sense and a feeling of Ukraine to Republicans. Recently, we aired a commercial on Fox and Friends, which is one of the president's favorite shows. We bought out the commercial, and the whole commercial is filmed here. It's in Ukraine. The scene is, it's a woman. She wakes up in the morning. It's a perfectly pleasant scene. She takes out a stack of papers, and she starts grading them. You can tell she's a teacher. She walks across the street. She grabs a cup of coffee from the local bodega. She walks into a building. It's a school building. And as she's walking by, you realize there's nobody there. The lights turn black. The desks are empty. There's scattered sandwiches half eaten on the floor. There's backpacks. There's notebooks scattered everywhere. And she just looks around in puzzlement, and she sees that she's there to teach, but there's no kids. And the narrator's voice comes on, and it says that since the start of the full-scale invasion, Vladimir Putin has kidnapped at least 19,546 children. President Trump, you have the power to bring them home. The idea is to talk to people on a visceral level so they can see something even if they're not coming here. On Democrats, yes, the short answer is we absolutely are a bipartisan organization. We work closely and actively with Democrats. When you're doing that, it's a different suite of arguments. It's a different suite of tools. So, for instance, Democrats are very interested in hearing about the Crimean Tatar story and the story of that population's repression, forced displacement, the history of Crimea. They're very interested in human rights discussions, dialogues. Obviously, they're very interested in questions of the International Criminal Court in ways that are probably less salient or interesting for Republicans. So questions of accountability become more front and center. But it's a different skill set. It's a different suite of issues. We're absolutely engaging with Democrats at the same time while being cognizant that there's a certain political dynamic in terms of who holds the legislative and the executive branch of government.
Thank you. And then the third question comes to you, Daniel, on territorial integrity and on Russia's imperial ambitions. This is very complicated to explain to foreigners, and you're a foreigner, and you have to explain it to some other foreigners, right? That Russia doesn't want to stop, that Russia doesn't just want one part of the Ukrainian territory, and then that's it. Like Vladimir Putin's dream has always been to have part of Kherson region, right? No, it's not working that way. So curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure, absolutely. So to tackle maybe the question of do Republicans in particular, and do people understand Putin's larger ambitions? I think this was less known at the beginning of the war. And as the war has dragged out, and especially as this peace process has dragged out and gone nowhere, this has become more and more apparent to a lot more Republicans about Putin's territorial ambitions. I would say there's two things that are going for Ukraine in the sense. One is that there's a strong coalition of European partners, such as the Baltics and the Scandinavians and others, who are relaying these points as well, that they feel a genuine fear for Russian imperialism as well. And the second thing is that the Russian propaganda machine, the Kremlin media machine, is open about these intentions. They very clearly say that we believe in this concept of, Великий Русский мир. They constantly talk about nuking the West. They constantly belittle Trump, even as far as going to Republican senators. So from my perspective, sometimes I will literally pull a clip of Russian propaganda of them saying these things and use that as evidence. And I think oftentimes using Russia's own words against it, their own rhetoric against it, to make the case to these Republicans that this is serious, that this is real, changes people's mind. Another fact is that, as I mentioned earlier, for a lot of particularly hawkish Republicans, this idea that Russia is working together with Iran and China to build a new global order also resonates with Republicans as well. And even if there's, let's say, skepticism towards the current government of Ukraine, or certain narratives that they believe about corruption, they understand that allowing Russia to succeed in this conflict empowers China, empowers Iran, empowers North Korea. So that is broadly understood. Territorial integrity is very complicated because many Republicans will have different answers on this, and there's no unified vision between the disparate groups of the MAGA coalition about how to view territorial integrity. I have heard everything from, we think that Ukraine has to make significant concessions in the 4 oblasts that Putin wants. We have heard that, I've heard at least that, Ukraine can regain most of the territories back, but there's no way they can get Crimea back. And generally speaking, Republicans are kind of waiting in general from their marching orders, quite frankly, with how the Trump administration views this issue in particular. I think if the sort of concept of territorial integrity is not realized, there will be Republicans who will hopefully speak out, and I believe a good amount would, in terms of understanding what a bad deal would look like. But this is one of the issues, I think, that broadly exists within the Republican coalition, is there are not a whole lot of answers on how the future looks like. And time, the response we get again is the simple one-sentence answer, which is that President Trump wants to pursue a pathway to peace, and we support his efforts to do that.
Thank you. And I would probably briefly add to that. From my own experience, it seems like many Americans, both Democrats and Republicans, they don't actually understand what occupation is, which is a huge problem because for many of them, the concept of occupation is, that's why they also refer to the concept of the Berlin Wall, because they believe that the occupation is something like the Soviet, American, British occupation of Germany. It's not like the occupation that we are having here. It's completely different. People are kidnapped, killed. There is no law. Nobody can protect your family. So this is one of the narratives that we try to deliver. And myself, I faced several cases when some of the congressional officers thought I was too emotional. Like, Russian Federation is a state. It has a legal system. It has a police system. So they can't just torture people and kidnap them in the streets and stuff like that. So you have to explain that, and this is also a challenge. Yeah, we are happy to take some other questions from the audience. Yes, please. Please briefly introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Alexander Stoyevsky, working in National Council of Radio and TV Broadcasting. So I have a question about media, the case of working with the media. Is it hard to work with US media if we are talking about the promoting of Ukrainian question in media? Because, as we know, the Trump's administration doesn't like to have a bad press when someone names Putin the war criminal. And the second question, after the elections, are U.S. media talking more about Ukraine or rather less, or it's on the same rate as it was? Thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to answer the media question? Daniel?
Yeah, I'm happy to tackle that. So I think the one thing that I would encourage everybody to come away with is that the media has changed radically in the United States, and what constitutes media today is fairly different from what has constituted it in years past. Gone are the days when most Americans receive their news from, the New York Times or the Washington Post delivered to their door. This is especially true if your goal is to try and shape the perspectives of Republicans. So we are in a universe where, podcasts, influencers, alternative sources of information, social media have been elevated in sort of deep and profound ways. So in that regard, I think there has been a pretty aggressive learning curve, and people who kind of want to do this work have had to really map out a new and previously unknown media system and really be sure to know and track who has influence and who kind of doesn't. There are still sort of legacy type outlets that have influence and currency. The New York Post is one of them. I think people kind of smirk at this, but I do think the Wall Street Journal opinion page still has some pickup. It really depends on who you're trying to influence in which sections of the Trump administration. But it's just important to be very critical and think through who your audience is and who's driving at that. Now, I think insofar as Ukraine is concerned, there are certainly Ukrainian voices that really have purchase and have buy-in in some of these new media outlets, whether it's for accomplished athletes, whether it's religious figures, but if your goal is to influence a Trump administration official, I would not bring out a suited older person who speaks in diplomatic tones and put them on CBS News. Like, that's not going to achieve that kind of outcome.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Daniel?
So to maybe tackle the second part of your question, which is, has media coverage of Ukraine increased since our election back in November? And I would say it has. One, because Trump, when he was elected and while he was campaigning, outlined a very clear timeline of when he could end the war. It was day one, then a month. I don't know where it's at now. So there was a lot of buy-in from the media to say, okay, let's track that. Let's see what's going on. And I think the other thing is when we're talking about Trump's kind of diplomacy outside of Ukraine, so whether it's talking about trade, whether he looks at other partners, that has been generally more covered by the media as well because of those controversies. And inadvertently, Ukraine is part of that conversation because Ukraine is so important to kind of the geopolitical order and global national security as well. I think from our perspective, in terms of talking to the media, what I do as a government affairs person is I try to highlight these media mentions, to highlight that this is being discussed. But I also think it's important to understand from maybe the grassroots perspective is how local media talk about this as well. So yes, we aim to have positive news coverage about Ukraine on the national media, but when our public engagement team like Anastasiia brings, chefs and different Ukrainian cultural figures to places like Louisiana, it is very important for us to be in touch with those local media sources for them to talk about our engagement within these constituencies, so we can reach a broader audience in those constituencies that are not just those individuals that we met. So the media, I would say the media's discussion of Ukraine has risen, given Trump's controversy and his very concrete promises. But one of the things that we want to look at and really improve upon is our access to local media and highlighting those local stories as it relates to Ukraine.
I'm going to add very fast. This is a super important question, so thank you so much for it. Whenever we travel to districts, whenever we work with local communities, media outreach is, if not the most important on our list. We need to make sure that we're not working just with this small group of people, but that the whole town, the whole city, the whole state knows that we're there, that we're present, and that we are raising the importance of Ukraine in this community. And then after this, elected officials can hear about us as well. So I would say what I see in districts, that there's not much coverage on Ukraine while we are not there. And it's not just us, Razom. There are a lot of active, proactive organizations in the United States, just Hromada, Diaspora, who work all the time organizing festivals, opening Ukrainian schools, churches, so they are being present on media as well. But what media appreciates all the time, so they're not being proactive themselves without personal stories. So that's what they're interested in, and that's what we are focusing on, to bring personal stories of people, and then they get interest, or if not personal stories, then beautiful, wonderful things like happened with this amazing, gorgeous trucks on Russian territory. So they are waiting for some spectacular actions, or sometimes extreme tragic. So that's the answer.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And here we have the final question, I think, from the audience. Maybe we'll combine several questions here and then.
Good afternoon. First of all, thank you for this excellent opportunity and this discussion. My name is Eduard Kuzmenko. I'm from Transatlantic National University and working on the history of international relations in this field. So I think my question will be connected with Russian influences, Russian misinformation, disinformation, also with connected with education, is in university education, and also about the worldview, world images of Ukraine. So, what's your maybe findings? How do American senators, American high-level officials, how do they see Ukraine in terms of understanding its history, understanding having the depth of knowledge of the Ukrainian history, these roots of this war, why Ukrainians fighting, and I think yes, that question is connected with university education. Also, maybe you should also would focus on Russian influences in these terms. Maybe some Russian intellectuals also influencing the discourse and other things. So it's like the framing question. You can find, you can choose what you want to focus on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And then, just as an addition to that, the second final question.
Hello. First of all, thank you so much for this event. I really appreciate you all being here. My name is Daria. I'm a sophomore student at NYU. And you already answered my question, so thank you so much for that. But my second question will be more general question. I would like to ask, how would you describe the U.S. long-term standing with Ukraine, long-term relationships with Ukraine, especially in the case if J.D. Vance is elected as the next president, and in terms where J.D. Vance, on behalf of the whole United States, showed their careless attitude towards Europe, EU, and NATO, and their current focus on Far East Asia and Taiwan issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I think what we'll do, we'll let you ask all of the two questions, each of you, like for several minutes, choosing the best part, which is the most interesting for you. Yeah. So we'll start. Yeah, we'll start from the Russian studies, from the universities, and then.
Yes, and I'm gonna let Daniels answer your question. Very complicated question. Both of your questions are super important, and I can hear the Ukrainian in your question for sure. And as a Ukrainian, I understand the importance of our heritage. I understand the importance of our history and our knowledge of our history, to understand why we're doing what we're doing, why we're fighting the way we're fighting, why we're ready and dedicating our lives to this fight, to this existential fight. Because if we're not going to fight, they're going to just erase us as a nation. And we understand that because Russians has been doing this to us over and over again, and this is very important for us to know. And of course, in the perfect world, everybody would benefit from, especially those people in power. Probably I'm answering this question as a Ukrainian too, not as advocate, but I'm here, I'm at home, so I can. we all would benefit if people in power would understand the reasons, the roots of this war. Then it would be much easier for them to make decisions, to understand even more clear who's who and what to expect from both sides in the future. So to answer your question, the deep understanding and knowledge of true long Ukrainian history is not as overwhelming as we would like for it to be. Only 3 weeks ago, I'm not going to mention any names, but we brought very influential people, very influential person from Ukraine to extremely influential people in the United States. They're very close to President Trump. They're on the advisory board, and they've been asking questions like, yeah, we understand that Ukraine need to be supported, but you have the Nazi Azov. And, you know, that happened 3 weeks ago. And we had to be like, okay, we have to go through this again. That's fine. Let's talk about this. So we had to go over and over again against this Russian propaganda narrative. And like it's like an old record, blank check, Nazi Azov, blank check, Nazi Azov. And that's, I'm going back to the beginning of my presentation, that move emotions aside. If they need to hear these answers, we're going to give them these answers as long as it takes for them to understand it and absorb it deeply. So then they're like, they can do our job on our behalf. So some of them do know the history and do know what to understand from Russia, but refuse to believe that Russia in today's world would do the same thing, that Russia would torture and kill all of these people who don't agree with them on occupied territories, because it's just not normal in today's world. So they refuse to understand it, they refuse to agree with this, and the knowledge of our history is minimum. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, whenever we come there, they're already exhausted of us educating them. So I found that the best way to fight that weakness of the West, I believe that that's their weakness, is to simply answer their questions. Do you believe in Nazi Azov? No. I strongly believe that Azov are heroic people who fight for right values, and they have nothing to do with Nazis. Next question, please. So that's how I believe it's working with them, and if they need more proof, we bring them proof.
Thank you. Just quickly jump in for several seconds. That it would be interesting to hear kind of the answers to the same question from you, from Americans who had to learn about Ukraine, actually, because probably at school, at college, you were not too much into Ukraine stuff. So very curious how you got this knowledge and how you are trying to educate other Americans now.
Yeah, okay, happy to talk about this. I think this is a super interesting question. I'm really glad it was raised. So first of all, within universities, Ukraine, to the degree it's taught, is taught through like I guess now it's often called like Eurasian, Eastern European Studies Department, but that's largely staffed by Russia Studies Kremlinologists, often who receive their education through the lens of the Cold War. So Ukraine is often taught as a kind of appendage to people who are interested exploring like the Russian-speaking world. I think that's starting to change, to be honest. It's very slow, it's very minimal, but if you sat down a professor from an elite university, they would like understand, they would at least be cognizant that there's something wrong with this framework of viewing the world. With respect to, Russian, yes, familiarity with Ukraine, yes, Americans do not know who Bogdan Khmelnytsky is. They don't have they have not read Taras Bulba. They don't have any thoughts about Vasyl Stus. There's just a really very minimal level of education. I think it was Kissinger who said that America's neighbors are Canada, Mexico, and fish. So with that comes some incredible amount of unearned privilege. of not having to know international geography or history. 2 data points on, Russian misinformation. We conducted a survey. I spent like several pretty miserable hours concocting a brief description of what I thought was the best, most like true to the Kremlin description of the Russian narrative about this war. It's familiar, like something that like Sergei Lavrov would look at and be like, oh yes, this represents my perspective. And then another couple sentences about, that describe reality, which is, of course, what Ukrainians would say to describe how this war started. And then we asked conservative MAGA supporters to choose between the 2 narratives, like this war started because of NATO aggression and Ukrainian intransigence and bullying of Russian speakers, or Russia invaded unprovoked and is committing atrocities. The results were actually quite shocking. 15% in favor of the Kremlin narrative, 85% in favor of reality. Which to me suggests at least a fairly low level of penetration of some of these narratives. At the same time, an opposite data point to share with you is that we have pretty good demographic statistics about who Ukraine is popular among and who it's not popular among. Young, college, not educated white men, so between the ages of like 18 and 25, it's really bad. It's super brutal. I don't know why. I have like thoughts and educated guesses. I think probably part of the reason is, TikTok and social media, I think is partially explanatory. I think part of the explanation is just this is a generation that's growing up after the legacy of the Cold War. So this narrative of like people subjugated by the Kremlin fighting for their freedom, demonstrating for democracy, doesn't have like a meaningful resonance with them. They're like, yeah, whatever. This is like nonsense my parents believed in. But those are just kind of 2 data points on the disinformation spectrum that you can think about.
Yeah, thank you. And then comes the most complicated part.
So what happens with J.D. Vance? I think the points that you raised makes a lot of sense, and this is what he said, that if he does win the Republican nomination and wins the general election, America would be much more inward-looking, would not be interested in engaging on the world stage. And one way to really understand his philosophy and his views is to look at this new principle, this new ideology called national conservatism, or nationalistic conservatism. And I would encourage all of you to, if you would like to understand better where this ideology and wing of the party look at these issues, is to visit their website and read their 10 statements of principles. And one of the ones that I find is most shocking is their principle on foreign policy, in which they condemn imperialism. They say, well, we're against the imperialism we see by China and by Russia, but we also condemn Western imperialism and the imperialism of the Western world imposing these, socially progressive values on other country. However, in my personal opinion, I don't think J.D. Vance would win a general election for a couple of reasons. One, isolationism as a principle is not popular amongst the American public. Even those who are, let's say, might have skepticism towards Ukraine, do not believe in the broader ideological vision of withdrawing America from the world stage, right? Americans still largely view China as our largest economic competitor and threat. There is still broad bipartisan support for the state of Israel and taking hawkish action against Iran, both of which that wing of the party, let's say the Vance wing of the party, has been more isolationist on as well. And the other point I would bring up is that he is not as charismatic as Donald Trump. He does not have the same, media swagger as Donald Trump. I remember pretty famously during the campaign trail where he had this, incident in a donut shop, in one of the swing states where he just looked incredibly awkward and out of place. So yes, I think a J.D. Vance presidency would not bode well for the transatlantic relationship and candidly America's leadership in the world. But from where I sit today, and obviously a lot of things could change in the 4 years, I do not see his appeal and his personality, quite frankly, as popular enough to gain a majority of Americans' voter support.
Yeah, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have run out of time 5 minutes ago, probably. But I would like to say thank you to our great speakers, and probably ask you to give them a round of applause. And I will also say thank you to our great audience who has found some time to be with us today. And see you on our next events. Thank you.
Thank you.